What's interesting about people with wealth is that our society believes you're either born with it or you're not. In reality, it's 86% of millionaires are self-made.
Welcome to the Freedom Point Real Estate Podcast, where we talk about creating more time freedom through passive real estate investing. Passive investing in real estate challenges conventional investment wisdom. We are passionate about learning and sharing resources with others who are ready to transform their investing mindset. Quick disclaimer as always, I am not a CPA, I am not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice, not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer, ADP. I'm glad you're here. Now let's dig in. All right, welcome back, Freedom Point podcast listeners. Thank you again for jumping into another episode of the Freedom Point. I'm your host, Jeremy Dyer. I know I say this all the time. I have another amazing guest, but this one's truly amazing, okay? I know I've had a couple of man crushes on before, but here's another one for you. With that said, I'd like to welcome Bronson Hill to the show. Welcome, Bronson.
Hey, thanks so much. Really excited to be here, Jeremy, and excited. It's time to talk about freedom, financial freedom, leaving your W-2. That's always a good day, always a good thing to talk about. So
That's right. Absolutely. And Bronson's really an authority figure in this space. So I don't say that lightly. He's a general partner in 2,000 multifamily units worth over 200 million. He's the host of his own podcast called The Mailbox Money Show. He's also the author of a best-selling book called Fire Yourself. Encourage you to check that out for sure. And then he was regularly a keynote speaker at a number of different real estate conferences and events. So again, just really excited to have you here with us today, Bronson. Before we kind of get into really chopping it up and me throwing some curveball questions at you, I'd really like for you to kind of explain to our listening audience a little bit more about, that transition that you made from the corporate life, the W-2 world, the dependence on the paycheck, right? That transition to where you're at now, where you're really living a financially independent or free life, and really kind of what you're currently focused on today.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, for me, I think I like a lot of people. I had a good job. I really call it, the golden handcuffs, where things are too good to leave. And I know you have a sales background as well, so you can relate with that. But I was making between 200 and 250,000 a year. I was often working 30 hours a week. People are like, you're crazy. Why would you want to leave this? This is amazing. Like, you shouldn't be happy. And yet I had this just desire, like probably since I was a teenager, like I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to have freedom over my time. And so a lot of us, we say we want financial freedom, but really what we want is time freedom. Right? We want to have the ability to take time off or to go on a vacation or take multiple vacations. I mean, last year I traveled 6 times internationally. This time it'll probably be about 6 times as well. And so I love being able to create that, be able to create memories with my daughter and be able to write books and do things that are important. So I think for a lot of people, Warren Buffett has this great quote, and I talk about it in my book in the beginning, is unless you learn how to make money when you sleep, you'll work until you die. And ironically, Warren Buffett's in his 90s, he's still working, but he's doing it on his own terms, right? And so to me, it's a tragedy that something like 70% of the workforce says that they're not engaged with their job. They don't like what they're just not. It's a place where there's a lot of corporate soul sucking that's out there, and it's like once people become free of that. I remember actually was sitting right at this table where I'm recording this, and I remember I had that it was about a month or two after I left my job a few years ago to full time in real estate and investing. And I had this memory come up of like, like it's end of the month. My manager's going to call me and say, how many widgets have you sold? How's it going? What's going to happen? And what came out of my mouth was, thank God I'm not doing the job anymore. So I guess that's a good sign, right? If you have, and it was very scary when I left. I found some entrepreneur friends that all encouraged me to look at my business and said, yeah, you should leave as soon as possible. And, it may not work, but, you could always go back to medical sales. So that was like a really comforting thing. I was like, oh, I didn't even think about that. I didn't know that was possible. Can you do that? So who you listen to and as you're going along that journey, it's important to pay attention to who you're listening to.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely a recovering sales professional like yourself, so I can relate to the comment that you made about, what do you have for me now, right? So you had a great week, you had a great month, you had a great quarter, a great year, but what's next, right?
Yeah,
So,
it is. That's it. It's just, hustle harder, good job, slap on the back, go out and do it again, do more.
yeah, it's definitely a grind, but at the same token, that really is what I would presume enabled you and myself included to be able to have enough discretionary, capital on the sidelines. Obviously, we weren't, spending all of our commission checks and bonuses, on the next, toy or trinket, right? But instead, we were, responsible stewards of what we were blessed with, and we chose to make or deploy that excess capital into investments that produced cash flow, which then allowed us to not be so dependent on the paycheck. I would presume that your journey is similar.
Yeah, it is similar. I did have some money to invest, and I invested it. And then I had a mentor. There's this saying: when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And so I'd been doing single family houses, and I had a few of them, and three or four of them, but they just weren't really producing cash flow. And then I had a relative I hadn't seen in a long time who said, "Hey, why don't you consider this? Sounds like a lot of work. Why don't you look at doing multifamily?" And I said, "Well, I'd love to, but I don't have the money." And he said, "Well, you can raise the money." So I learned about this thing called syndication, which is basically pooling investments together and helping to as I invest, other people invest, and we go after a larger project. And I think what I didn't realize at the time is that real estate's not all the same. There's a lot of people that think that they're doing really well because they've got a rental house, two or three, but I call it the scalability test, right? If you can't 10x what you're currently doing, so if I have three rental houses, if I couldn't immediately go to 30, or even if I'm not the manager, even if it's out of area, then I'm basically just making more work for myself, right? I'm having to asset manage those, and a lot of those have neat things that come up, and tenants don't pay, and toilets break, and it's still kind of a headspace thing. And so a lot of times we undervalue our own time, right? As individuals. So I find a lot of professionals that we work with, I'm sure you do as well. They have more money than they have time, and they don't quite know how to make it work for them, so that they start this whole other, not just the work bucket or the business bucket, but they have this other bucket that's like the income, the passive income bucket, right? And it actually doesn't take that long if you're diligent and you learn and you focus. Typically within 3 to 5 years, I mean, my book talks about less than 3 years, but you can find a way to replace your income, or at least your expenses, within a few years, typically.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's interesting that you brought up that point about sometimes people believe that investing means you have to invest your way into a second full-time job, right?
Right.
I know lots of franchise owners, over the years that have done that exact, thing. I also know a lot of real estate investors that believe that the only way to diversify into real estate is to do it on the active side. So I appreciate you calling that out. I also appreciate the fact that you called out that in order to become financially free or independent, number one, you have to have the capital to be able to do that, to actually make investments.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a get rich quick scheme, right? But it is very interesting what can happen, when you compound these investments on top of one another, right? I can't tell somebody that I'm going to change their wealth building trajectory in less than 3 years, but I can with the disciplined approach in three or more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's a lot of times too. I remember I first heard the word syndication. I thought they were talking about like a crime syndicate, or like some sort of, TV show, syndicated TV show. But it's just interesting how when you learn, I mean, stuff that sounds crazy. I know that it's become more popular, and of course, people listening to your show are going to be more familiar with it. But it's just amazing when we learn from other people. I think Brian Tracy was the one that said, if you want to earn more, you have to learn more. And so, I really look at that as that's being like a part-time job, with whatever you're doing. You look at these really successful people like Warren Buffett, Mark Cuban, Oprah Winfrey. They spend sometimes hours a day reading and learning. And so again, some of the busiest people in the world really invest in themselves. And so that's the part that I think a lot of people don't realize, is that it's a combination of learning and doing. And it's like, if you miss one of those, if you just learn and never do anything, you're analysis paralysis. If you only do but never learn, you're not reflecting, you're not actually really growing. So those things are really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And along those same lines, Bronson, what are some of the most effective strategies that you've seen for building long-term wealth that you feel like most people overlook?
Yeah, so I actually have had the opportunity to interview over 2,500 millionaires, average net worth of 2 million. And what's interesting about people with wealth is that our society believes you're either born with it or you're not, or that you have these connections, or you're in the right family or the right neighborhood, that you just kind of were blessed with that. But in reality, it's 86% of millionaires are self-made. So that, I mean, it's still shocking to me when I share that. Almost 9 out of 10 millionaires actually, they figured it out on their own. And so, as much as we think it's this, like, honestly, most people, their plan is to either win the lottery or have their rich uncle die, and then they'll become wealthy. But there's a problem with that, because you don't really actually develop being a wealthy person in your mindset and the way that you live. So there's this idea of the mindset it takes. And one of the things in my new book called Rich Brain, how the wealthy change their brain to change their bank account, is just I call it wealth worthiness. It's very similar to if I let's say I'm single and I see a beautiful woman and I go up and talk to her and I'm going to ask her out on a date or have a conversation. If I don't believe I'm worthy of a good relationship, I don't have a high value for myself, I'm going to go in and I'm going to sabotage that conversation. And somehow it's not, because I already know it's not going to go well. My self-talk's going to be poor, all this stuff. And so it's very similar in the same way how wealth works, right? If I actually believe I'm worthy of it, I'm actually believe that I'm able to achieve that. Brené Brown is a great author in the self-help space. She talks about people that do and inherit and have great things and those that don't. The difference between them is the first group felt worthy of it, right? So it's this idea of wealth worthiness, and there's specific habits around that you can do. But I think one of the things that surprised me the most is just that people that have wealth typically have either had it before or along the way they figured out how to feel like they are actually worthy of having more. And it's just kind of that's the thing, something people can do before they become wealthy.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk specifically to the concept of this rich uncle. Number one, I don't have one, so there's no rich uncles in the Dyer family that I'm aware of, anyways. How does the tax code, favor the rich uncles? Okay, and then how can somebody that isn't a rich uncle or doesn't have one take advantage of those same tax strategies?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think one of the things that I've learned, the more I learn about finance, and I was an investment advisor, was what's called a registered investment advisor for a few years. It's called an RIA. Well, I'm still an RIA. It's just I'm a recovering investment advisor, and so but I was able to see some of the things that take place. And not everything is fair in any system, but Tom Wheelwright, who's a great tax strategist and CPA, wrote a number of books about tax-free wealth and things like this, has said that if you want to change your tax, you got to change your facts, right? So the idea that if you're an investor, and there's some stuff being floated now that they're going to tax unrealized gains, which is kind of crazy because then it could crash the stock market. Let's say if somebody's got all these unrealized gains in the stock market, they have to sell everything to pay anyway. It's kind of interesting, not to get too political, but I think that when it comes to taxes, strategy is important, and there are certain assets that are better, and that's why I think you and I and many others love real estate. And honestly, like, I don't love real estate. Real estate is it's there, it's great, but I love what real estate does for me, right? It allows me to get from where before I was paying a 25% taxable rate, I'm paying about a 1% rate, right now, right? So I found ways to be able, and people call these loopholes, but they're actually incentives. These are things the government has actually set up to promote things like affordable housing as well as energy. So in the oil and gas space, there's ways you actually can reduce taxes. I have a whole chapter 8 of my book talks about reduce your taxes, maybe even to zero, right? So I think just the ability to grow wealth, to not be, in California where I live, the top tax rate, some physicians that I know are paying 39% on the top rate, and then it's I think another 14%, on the state tax. So it's over 50%, 55% ish, and that's most of your money, right? So I think having these strategies and things you can do to be able to really partner with the government and say, okay, you're not necessarily in a partnership, but they're incentivizing things that they need to get done, because the government, when they create housing, it becomes like the projects, right? Or they are doing things in energy, it's just not nearly as efficient. So they want to really do these things that really create quality of life for people and affordable housing and energy.
Yeah, I so appreciate you explaining, that to our listening audience. And, for folks that know me personally, know that when I got involved in real estate investing, I was able to take my federal, tax rate from 37% down to 12%, right? And of course, everybody, wants to do that too, right? Of course, Bronson and I are not CPAs, right? You have an RIA background, but I don't think you're also a tax planner by
No,
any stretch of
no.
the imagination. So, obviously seek your own financial advice and CPA, advice there. But real estate can absolutely be, advantageous from a tax perspective. I'd like to pivot now to talk a little bit about, economic downturns. So, most people that listen to this podcast, lived through the dot-com bubble burst. They lived through the global financial crisis. They lived through COVID. They lived through, the historic run-up in interest rates that we experienced, just a few years ago. So, how would you say that, or what role, I should say, do alternative investments play in protecting the investor against economic downturns?
Yeah, I just had a current financial advisor on my show. I don't usually have him, but it's kind of through a connection. He's a financial planner, and we were talking about this, and I brought up he does a lot of traditional things, and he's a friend. But I was just talking through it, and I realized, I love alternatives, and I think that we call them alternatives, but something happened, back in the '70s and early '80s where they had this law called ERISA that passed. I think it was 1977, and it passed, and it was basically the employee retirement insurance or something. It basically moved from having a direct benefit, so meaning like, hey, you have a pension. This is kind of what you're getting, and you get your pension to go to direct contributions. So companies make contributions, and then how it turns out is how it turns out, and that's kind of how you're doing. And so over time, who really educates us about finance is big Wall Street firms. And I've seen that just so much more clearly. That's why when I meet somebody like, well, I haven't heard about syndication, or why I haven't heard about these deals, or, if they're that great, why aren't they everywhere? And it's like, well, just follow the money. I mean, they talk about the Wall Street misalignment, but there was a time between 1929, we had the big stock market crash. Everybody knows about that, but it actually, if you look at what the numbers actually said, it actually came down 89% over the next 3 or 4 years. So the early 30s, it was just incredible depression, and then it didn't recover. It wasn't like it just like popped back up a couple years later. It took 25 years from the bottom for it to come back. It wasn't until like 1955 or 59, or it was years and years later that it actually came back. And so I think that for a lot of people, we think these things are safe and secure. And so finding things that are alternatives, I'm imagining that in the 40s or 30s, there were probably times people were saying, it was actually the best time to buy stocks, right? But people were saying, oh, why would you ever do that, right? So I think having a diversity is good. I think, in general, if you look at very large investors, people that are very wealthy, the Tiger 21, the 20 million net worth or more, they have some percentage, usually about 15-20% in public equities, a lot in private equity, because private equity, you can just get phenomenal deals. I mean, we're making an offer this week on an e-commerce business that costs $12 million. We're able to finance 80% of it. So we'll bring a few million to the table, and it should produce around, even after we pay the debt service, around $4 million a year. Right, it's just unbelievable, right? So there are things out there that really provide the three things that our investors typically look for: is cash flow. Cash flow is really the most important one if you want to leave a job, right? Like, so for you, if you're leaving your job, I'm leaving my job, I got to figure out how I can replace expenses, or I can replace income, or whatever. And then you have appreciation. People that are wealthier, how can I just get some appreciation or have a long-term gain? And then the last one is the tax benefits. And all of those are important in different order for different people. But I think things that do those, typically Wall Street doesn't really do cash flow. It's hard, maybe some dividends occasionally for certain stocks, but a lot of volatility, right? And so I think some of the other benefits are just so much better, and the returns are so much better. If you look at them historically, it's like real estate's, almost twice what the stock market does. If you look at it historically, it's really amazing.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, I was kind of thinking to myself, it's interesting that we call investing in multifamily or commercial real estate or any other investment options like your oil and gas or self storage or e commerce businesses. It's interesting that we call those alternative investments. Right. It's almost like the alternative should actually be Wall Street because Wall
Yeah.
Street and the financial products that people are, sold today, not all of them have been around forever, right? A lot of
Yeah.
them are newer products. Am I correctly saying that?
Yeah, yeah, no, they keep coming up with new products and things. A lot of this stuff has been here for a bit, but it's I call it's like the financialization of everything, right? Like, and there's some benefits to it. It's not all bad. I mean, the fact that you can be liquid and you can buy and sell, one day or one moment to the next, there's a benefit to that, but there's a huge premium you pay for that. And so, Warren Buffett is a great guy to study if you're new to this. You've been doing this a while. I mean, his quotes are incredible, but he says that sometimes the illiquidity, it's an advantage because you don't panic sell. You can't sell, right? In a syndication, you get in, you're in for a few years, or maybe 5 years, maybe for a while before you're able to really get out. So I think that Wall Street is there's just a lot of misalignment of interest. There was a study that came out that showed that over 50% of those that managed funds of over $100 million that were in traditional investments had $0 invested of their own in that fund. And that just says a lot, right? That basically somebody doesn't eat their own cooking, right? They're like, oh, we're just going to do this for them, but not for us. And so I love syndication because it's one of the ways that high net worth or retail investors can get into something where the interests are really aligned with the sponsors. And often sponsors will have 5 to 10% or more of the raise of their own money in the deal. And so I just love being able to align interests like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that your book talks a lot about mindset and having the right, mindset, mind shift mindset shifts, et cetera. What would you say, the mindset shift that would be necessary for someone to move from being a saver to an investor?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One is that saving is actually losing. And I have an opinion, not everybody shares this opinion, but I mean, regardless, we know inflation is here, right? It's food costs across grocery stores are up 50%, 50% from where they were 4 years ago before COVID. So we know that they've created every quarter they're creating, or they're actually deficit spending $1 trillion every single 90 days. So we know that that's like the one certainty. We know there's going to be more and more inflation. The official rate might be 3.2% inflation. I think it's more like 6 or 8%. They have an incentive to understate that number. So if that is the case, then for every 100,000 you have in the bank, just by doing nothing, or even if you get 3 or 4%, you're still losing, because if inflation, in my opinion, is 6 or 8%, you're losing just by sitting in there. So Robert Kiyosaki says savers are losers, and so I don't think he's saying that they're don't have a bright future. He's just saying you're actually losing money, and so you need to find a way to hedge. I like to get into things that are hedged. Sometimes there's ways you can use inflation to your advantage. And I have an ebook I wrote about that, about how to use inflation to your advantage. I'd love to give it to your audience at the end of the show here. But yeah, I think that again, it's just it's a mindset shift. A lot of people that save understand, hey, I have this, it's here, but you're also losing purchasing power, and so there's a risk of what happens if in the next few years those dollars that you have are worth considerably less, which we're seeing that, right? Even no matter what they officially report or not, we're seeing it. So I think that that's why I do love real assets. I do things in precious metals. We buy real estate. We're doing businesses. We're doing different types of things because the saying is cash is trash, right? We know that a dollar today is not what it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. Like it's significantly devalued, and that's only going to continue. So saving is a virtue, but I think these days, really investing is much more of a virtue.
Yeah. How do you personally balance risk and reward when evaluating new investment opportunities?
It's really hard, honestly, to evaluate risk. I think there are things that are super safe, such as U.S. Treasuries are considered very safe because they're exchangeable for cash. They're 4% return over the next 10 years on average per year. And then you have other things like money market accounts, or you've got other high yield savings accounts. And then on the other hand, you've got much more risky investments, right? That are you've got venture capital deals. We've got one deal that it's probably a 50% chance it goes to zero, but if it works the way we think it could work, it could be like a 10x or 100x kind of thing, right? So there's higher risk in that. So we know there's going to be some risk. Some people would say, if you have higher returns, you always have higher risk. I don't think that's always the case, but to be transparent, we've had a couple multifamily deals we did, the last few years that, we got hurt by the rates coming up so quickly. And so we haven't had any losses. We might have some, but, it's one of the things that, we have to invest and we learn. And so that's where it's went between those two, the higher risk and the lower risk. It can be challenging to know exactly where an investment sits on that spectrum, and where you think it is, something changes and rates go higher, whatever. All of a sudden it's like, oh, I guess this moved over quite a bit this way. So that's one I haven't really figured out. So I think some diversity can help you. I think playing out different scenarios, but just know that everything you plan probably won't happen, and the thing that you didn't even think about could happen. So I try to think in the case of scenarios as, okay, am I diversified enough? I mean, I don't think you need to be diversified everywhere, but having some diversity, I think, is powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously understanding what your goals are. Our goals change over the course of our, span of our lifetime. And, if you had asked me to take a risk and do an angel investment, 25 years ago, I would have thought you were crazy.
Yeah.
Today, I'm in several of them, right?
Yeah.
And I know that some of them might turn into pure cash donations at the end of the day, right? But
Right.
if one of them ends up, panning out the way that I hope it can or will, perhaps, that's where you're looking at your, 10x to 100x. So,
Yeah.
I know that you've had a chance with your upcoming book launch, Rich Brain. I know that a big kind of component to that is the assembly of a lot of these conversations that you had with higher net worth individuals. So, what would you say are some of the common mistakes that you see high net worth individuals or investors making when it comes to wealth preservation?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one that I see, and I talk about this in my book as well, is that we go, we learn about all the stuff, and we just don't take the action. And I'm guilty of this too. I had 6 years where I would go regularly to real estate meetups, and I didn't do anything. I never really made a decision. And so, it's just analysis paralysis. There's no other way to say it. I think that for someone that has a net worth of $1 million or a couple of million, it's just taking a small amount of money and saying, okay, for you, 50K, for some people, that's all their money. But if you have 2 million or you've got 1 million, that's, okay, I've got some money here. I'm going to put it into a deal in the next 60 days and look at, 5 to 10 deals and then make a decision. So give yourself a timeline and do it. So I think that's a big one that for a lot of people, they can get stuck on that. Another one I think is, I think I see this for people that have been investing for a while, is that they'll kind of get stuck to one asset. And so we have done a fair amount in multifamily. We just took a break for about 2 years. We're just really getting back into it now because we're seeing discounts of 30% or more, and in great markets like Dallas or Charlotte. And I know you're working in some of these markets as well. And then we're doing other assets. We're doing oil and gas. We're doing private businesses. We're doing car washes. We're doing different types of businesses that produce cash flow. And I think that's something that a lot of investors are like, how do I get more cash flow? Well, it's pretty hard in real estate right now. So there are other assets and things to consider. And I think if you're if you're a savvy investor, you're able to look at different assets, and the same principles you learn in multifamily, you learn in commercial real estate or single family, they apply to other investments. And so it's not like it's just I'm going from one language to like I'm speaking French and all of a sudden I'm speaking Spanish or Latin. It's like it's not. It's just like you can use those same principles and you can apply them over here. And so I think I think that's a really valuable skill. So I think for people to develop, I would say that's a big one. And then the last one is developing your network. So we started recently. We started a mastermind called the Wealth Forum, which is basically net worth 2 to 10 million or more of high net worth folks. And everybody in finance is biased, right? I'm biased. You're biased. We're good-meaning, well-meaning people, but we have deals that we want everybody to do our deals, right? So we have some bias there. But another passive investor who's got a similar net worth and they're trying to figure it out, they're not going to be as biased. They're going to be, hey, I worked for these guys for 10 years. They're incredible. Work with these guys. I would avoid them. Or here's something I knew on the tax strategy side. And so we found that those are really transformational relationships. And so I think getting around other people, whether it's through local meetups, joining a mastermind, going to conferences, can be really, really powerful. So I encourage anybody who's trying to do that, just try to figure out how you can network with people that are in your position.
That's great. Well, you've done some amazing things, in the space of passive real estate, investing and growing, your business, Bronson Equity. Would love to just, hear from you. What's on your bucket list as we look to wrap up 2024 and move into 2025 and beyond?
Yeah, well, I got to finish writing my book, Rich Brains. That's one thing that's on there. I just was in Ireland. I'm going to, I've got a trip to Cancun in a couple of weeks, and then I'm going to Portugal coming up. So I got some trips. I really enjoy that. And then just continue to have goals. Have goals. I'm a big goals guy. I read my goals every morning, do a goals retreat every year, and reflect on them quarterly. Get away for a couple of days, and I just think that's those are all important things. And so I think for me, my big why really is to end modern day human slavery in the world, and it's a big, hairy, audacious goal. And can one person do it? Like I don't think one person can't do it, but it can make a difference in the life of one person. But there's 20 to 40 million human slaves in the world, which is more than we've ever had. A lot of people don't realize that. And most people that are in, there's different types of slavery, but they never become free. And about 99% never become free. And so to me, it's just something that I've become very, very passionate about. And I want to continue to find ways to give time and resources to that cause.
That's great. And speaking of free, I know that you had offered, at least you dangled out there, a free offer for our listening audience. So I want to make sure we have an opportunity for you to talk about what that freebie is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wrote this before I wrote my book. I wrote this book. It's called How to Use Inflation to Your Advantage. And it's right here. It's about 40 pages, color ebook. And, it's not just, hey, buy real estate or, whatever. You use debt. And there's also some unique strategies involving precious metals or businesses and just ways that you can position yourself that you're not getting hit by the pain every time you go to the grocery store. You get, you still feel that, but to be on the other side of the equation where you actually use it to your advantage, right? So if you own an apartment building, if inflation goes up, that causes rents to go up. Is that good or bad for you? Well, you can weather it pretty well. And if you have debt, you actually are doing just fine. So I think, so that's one thing. But if you want to have that, you can text the word inflation to 33777. So if you just to the number 33777, you just text the word inflation, you can get that guide for free. And you can hear about our upcoming stuff as well. So, but it's been really fun being here today, Jeremy. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, that's great. And I would love to have you give our listening audience maybe a couple of different ways that they can learn more about what you're up to. And we'll certainly provide those links in the show notes for the episode as well.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much. Yeah, you can check out my book, Fire Yourself, on Amazon. It's become a bestseller, which I'm really grateful for. My website, if you're interested in getting on our list or hearing about our deals, we have some really unique stuff in and outside of real estate. You can go to bronsonequity.com, click the join button, and we'll start a relationship with you and share our upcoming deals. And I'm on all the socials as well, so people can connect with me there as well.
That's great. Well, Bronson, we really appreciate you joining us today and providing such tremendous value.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it, Jeremy. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks.
You bet. And listening audience, thank you again for jumping into another episode of The Freedom Point. We look forward to having you join us on the next episode.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the Freedom Point podcast, powered by Starting Point Capital. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decision, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the Freedom Point podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. If you're interested in connecting, you can find contact information at startingpointcapital.com.